Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will continue our discussion of Freemasons for Dummies with Chapter 5, How the Freemasons are Organized, Who Does What, and Why.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the podcast, we have our usual group of hosts. We have David Colbeth from King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington, Craig Graham from Kalamalka Lodge number 160 in Vernon, British Columbia, Stephen Chung from Prince Charles number 153 in Kelowna, British Columbia, and I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243 in lovely Montlake Terrace, Washington. And I think we made it through like a whole page in our last episode. So, David, you said you had something you wish to say about the stewards before before I try and cut this all off again.
Oh, no. Well, we talk about the deacons and all that kind of stuff too. So I wasn't really, of course we can come back to it and weave them in there. But the one of the things I highlighted as I was reading was the steward's role. Of course, as we've talked about already, that they're really subject to the junior warden and supposed to help him and assisting with the refreshments and all that. But it also indicates, HODAP says that they are helped set up the lodge room. And yeah, I guess as a default, they are those members on the floor. And ultimately, in my opinion, all officers and members should be responsible to set up the lodge room. Really shouldn't fall to one guy or two guys necessarily. But it was interesting that he highlighted that. And I thought, man, the stewards are usually pretty busy. Now, in my year, as my first time as master, we hadn't established as well of instructions. Even when I was a steward the first time, it wasn't as clear that I was supposed to be the assistant to the junior warden. It was a little bit assumed, but it was a very loose role. And the guy next to me that was the senior warden was ancient, and he was ancient, free and accepted, and he was not going to be able to assist in that role. And so it was just more of filling a chair at the time. And our junior warden was really great, and he didn't really need any help. And so it was the stewards have been a little bit of just a seat filler for many years. In this particular year, our junior warden is a lineman for high power lines, and he's like right now and the weather, he's gone. And so we had to request that there was two strong stewards, with the understanding that they three need to work together very closely to make sure that things work well. And it has been working good this year. And all of us have pitched in if necessary to assist him. So
that's interesting, because in our lodge, not only do the stewards take care of the bar and the food for the junior warden, but they also prepare the candidates, right? In the ancient work, the steward is the one who sent out to prepare the candidates to come in, and
that's what we do too.
Okay, so that's their ritualistic role, if you will, and as well as serving the bar and the food. So
in our lodge specifically, our meals are all catered by the place where we meet, so our stewards don't have much to do in that aspect. But what we do actually, one of the things that's another thing that the steward's not doing is we try and get our newest guys, the new EAs, to set up the lodge room under some supervision, obviously, in an effort to teach them where things go and, hey, why is that? And that sort of thing, generate some questions and have a teaching opportunity there for the new guys.
Yeah, we try to incorporate that into our coaching and mentorship, where if we can have the senior deacon do it, he's supposed to engage the new guys to come and help him set up the lodge hall in advance, so that he can spend that time to explain not only where things go, but why they're there, and the different furnishings of the lodge, and to answer their questions, because inevitably they get a bunch of them, right? So
hopefully.
Well, what is this? What are these, and what are they actually for? right? Because as they're going through, if you guys remember back, there's so much information fed to you in each degree that there's no way you can absorb it all in one night. So over time, being able to participate in setting up the lodge and participating in the degrees for the next guys coming through, that's your opportunities to learn more about those things and focus on them, right?
Yeah, for sure.
How do the stewards got the same role in Kalamalka?
Yeah, they kind of they follow the expected role you see in BC. I was just sort of thinking about I once visited a lodge in England, and I think that lodge had appointed about 6 stewards because the English treat the office a little differently. But they also sit to much more elaborate meals at the end of their lodges as well. So they're catered, but the stewards are basically the one that makes sure the room is set up, and then as everybody sits down, they serve the various courses of the meal. Bring the plates of food out to the tables and whatnot. And I think one of them would have served the bar as well. But I don't know. I don't know enough about their degree work to if they had a similar responsibility for candidate preparation.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will ask the greatest.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I will ask the greatest question I've ever had about stewards that has lasted throughout my Masonic career since, my first officer position was junior steward. The steward's officer jewel is the cornucopia. One faces to the left and one faces to the right. So the question is, when the stewards are seated in front of the junior warden, do the 2 cornucopias face inward to one another, or do they face outward away from one another?
Popcorn.
I'm gonna challenge you to past masters in a room together, ask them that question, and see if at the end of 6 hours of debate, if anything has been.
That's a good one. I think I'm going to pose that. I see how long that debate goes on for sure.
Oh, there's something about Freemasons and dead horses. Just yeah.
That's that's what our stewards prepare.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because we got one guy in lodge that I know. He's very particular on how the placement of the wands and the direction of them facing and yeah, our stewards and deacons have wands that they carry, staffs.
Okay.
Staffs. Yeah. You were thinking fabric.
Well,
It's
a joke here too. We don't call them staff because we can't afford to have staff. It's
rods.
We call them rods here, but that's what our deputy drilled into me. He said, "Well, we can't afford to have staff."
That funny Canadian lodge calls them rods, so we call them wands.
Okay.
But I'm gonna ask that particular brother that question. That's a gooder. I'm gonna wait and see the answers on that one.
Let me know if you get a good answer.
Yeah, because he's got an answer for everything. So and like they're supposed to be carried at a particular angle, and the whole 9 yards.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. I think that comes from his military background, but
Had we had? I think years ago we had Al Jorgensen on. He was my mentor, and he's a past Grand Master, past SGIG of Scottish Rite in Washington. Yeah, I mean, to us, he's Al Jorgensen. He's not just Al Jorgensen. And we're very fortunate to have a member of our lodge, and he's very Socratic. He'll just sit back and listen, and he'll ask a question. What do you think? Basically, what do you think? And wants to know your opinion about stuff. When he says something, it's got E.F. Hutton. You listen, you pay attention. And he's, of course, a magnificent ritualist. It took about 10 years, and he finally missed a word. I said, "Oh, he's not perfect." And he knows it he knows all the work. I mean, the Eastern Star and every Scottish. I mean, he knows all these work. And he came up during the time when you had to know every piece. As senior deacon, you conferred and did the lecture. As junior warden, you conferred and did the lecture. I mean, he came up during that time. So he doesn't do the lectures anymore, but he had to at one point. But
So when
installation.
he came through, everything was ear to mouth. There was no books,
Probably, yeah.
right? Yeah.
And he has been installation. He's like a traveling circus with installation. He goes to everybody. Everybody asks Al because he really does an amazing job, and he's got some really cool pieces. How he does in the floor work. But one of the funny things, and Al is very strict. It's standard work. I remember when I was going to master, and I wanted to have a demolay, senior demolay, come in and do a piece of the candle ritual, or the lights. What's it called, Matt? When they do the candle, the candle demolay candle lecture.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's candle ceremony.
Candle ceremony. Thank you. And I wanted him to do kind of in the middle, and Al said very politely, "David, the standard work, once it's begun, must be finished." And I said, "Oh, okay." But it's funny.
You guys only have the one work, right?
For installation, yeah.
No, for
anything.
like
we have one
for anything. Yeah,
one not for like some people.
Oh, right.
Okay.
But it's funny when he's doing installation, most of the time, especially if there's more robust stewards that are being installed, he does take the time to pause and say, when I'm installing stewards, I'm always excited for the lodge because I know they're going to be well fed when there's very robust stewards that are installed. It's a little levity, but it's kind of fun.
All right, so I think then we come into officers not in the progressive line. So speaking of pauses, I was visiting a lodge the other day, so in the treasurer section here, I was visiting a lodge the other day, and the treasurer in the ritual, he's asked what he does, and he stood up and said, "To take charge of the stocks and other properties of the lodge." And yeah, he was having his fun with it, but it was.
They do that with the secretary too. They try to say, was it obey rather than observe? There's to observe the will and pleasure, and they always say, "Get him to say obey. Get him to say obey."
Not this secretary. But yeah, I mean, the secretary and the treasurer's jobs largely are what you would think someone labeled secretary or treasurer is. I mean, the treasurer takes care of the money, the secretary does the paperwork, the minutes, keeps track of dues, all that sort of stuff. I don't know if there's a whole lot there to.
But those guys are elected. So the non-elected officers are non-progressive line. That would include like your inner guard, your Tyler, your historian, your director of ceremonies,
I guess I would argue the secretary and the treasurer are not. No one thinks they're going to next be whatever junior warden, senior warden, master, right? They're sort of on the org chart. They're off in their own corner over there,
dotted line to the master kind of thing.
And probably generally you'd want. I'm not going to say that exclusively you'd want past masters in those roles, but certainly you'd want people who had a number of years of Masonic experience already before they took a role like that on.
So exactly what I was going to ask is, have you an experience? Have you ever not seen a past master in those roles?
We have two guys in our lodge who not currently are not secretary because I'm there, but they both have been secretaries of other lodges and are not past masters. One in Oregon and one in Washington. So,
okay.
I don't know that I could think of one for sure.
We've had both. Nelson Jattel, not a past master yet, and he served as both treasurer at one time and secretary. He actually stepped out of line. He was due to be installed as senior warden, but our secretary passed, and so we needed to replace him, and we didn't have anybody else. The membership numbers were so low that he agreed to go into the fill that role on the agreement that when he's finished his schooling and his doctorate, and was ready to continue, that he would go back in starting at the senior warden's chair. Right. So yes, we have had that past.
I will say, Greg, to your point though, it does seem it would definitely make the job, I don't know if easier is the word, but make one more prepared for the job if one had been a master of the lodge. Although I always say I was a master of the lodge twice, and I still didn't know half the stuff the secretary did.
And I think arguably you can make a case that in both of those positions, the secretary and the treasurer, you would like somebody that's going to hold that position for more than a year. They're not going to pass through that in a year like they do in the line. You would like a secretary that would be willing to commit to 4, 5, or 6 years in that position, because it not that it's a particularly difficult job, but it's just one that you need a routine, and there's things that have to be done on an ongoing basis. That's sort of a little better if somebody is going to do that for an extended period of time.
Apparently, there's a lot of paperwork to file for Grand Lodge and reports and things like that. I had no idea about before until I started helping the secretary with his communications. Right.
I think there's yearly reports, and then there's always, every meeting I go to, there's at least one piece of correspondence that comes from Grand Lodge that is required to be read in open lodge, and so there's there's a lot of process to it.
There's a secretary's database too. So every time a guy advances to the next degree, he's supposed to go into the database and update the database. At Grand Lodge, he's supposed to update when there's a demit or so on as well, so that, or a suspension, right? So that Grand Lodge is aware of all these things all the time.
And I will not toot the secretary's horn in general, but there are a fair number of things that never make it to the lodge meeting that the secretary ends up taking care of, where some guy, whatever, hey, I'm thinking about joining this lodge in California, can you send me a certificate of good standing? So I've got to get the certificate ready and send it to the Grand Lodge so they can send it to the Grand Lodge of California, and blah, blah, blah. And, honestly, I don't usually bother reporting on these things in a meeting. They just sort of happen in the background. And right. Like I said, they're things that I didn't realize happened, or at least not as often as they happen.
So is it a job a guy, really wants to take on, Matt?
I think it's a good job. Another thing I always say is that the only thing I like more than complaining about being secretary is being secretary. So it's a good job. I've gotten to meet brothers from my lodge and correspond with them that I never would have otherwise. We've got a guy in Sweden, and so for his birthday, I'll send him an email and he'll send me an email. We'll correspond back and forth for a couple of weeks before it sort of peters out again. But just sort of seeing how he's doing, how his family's doing, and that sort of stuff. And otherwise, I honestly would probably never know that brother existed. And it's just an opportunity to establish some of these relationships. And I really value it, actually. I enjoy it a lot. So there you go. That's my sales pitch. Everyone should become secretary. Go out there and do it.
I've always said I'm not organized enough to be the secretary.
This is a good point. Not everyone should be secretary. This is a very good point. But you should...
It's interesting you talk about how the secretary, we've talked about it, the secretary is in the second most powerful person in the lodge. But if we step back a little bit, we think about the treasurer, and we're just about to segue into chaplain and other roles, Matt put a nail on it that it was a funny example, but the treasurer's opening line is to take charge of the stocks. In other words, how many of our treasurers really take ownership and charge of the finances of the lodge and making sure that every dime is invested properly and every penny, and are they really doing that, or are they just kind of the bank balances and the checks got cashed, and are they really? And I would say the same thing, that as we dive into the chaplain, a lot of times it's I just do the prayer at the opening and prayer at the closing, and it's a rote position, where really it says in the installation, at least our installation, it says he's supposed to be kind of the, if you will, the holy man of the lodge, and to really help to disseminate that knowledge of the law, book of the law, whatever book that might be, and not just do those positions willy-nilly. So it kind of drives, are we taking our roles, as little as we think they might be, more as seriously as they should?
Funny, I've mentioned Albert Mackey in previous episodes. He in one of his books, in fact, I think again it's Jurisprudence of Freemasonry, he actually argues against the idea of even appointing a chaplain, because he actually writes in the book that the sacerdotal rights that are present in a Masonic lodge belong to the master and not some other office nearby. It's interesting. I mean, chaplain is meant to lead prayer and what have you, but if you think about it, he's really not really ordained for the job or anything. It's just, it's something anybody can do, and I understand in a religion, anybody should be able to lead prayer. The Christianity has a long history of lay preaching, but I just thought that was an interesting. The chaplain came up with that was always something interesting. That Mackey's view on it was quite notable.
That is interesting. Yeah, it says, I mean, as David was saying, it says in our ritual that he's supposed to teach from the life-giving precepts of the volume of sacred law, and it's interesting to think that that's the master's job on some level. That's going to bear some thinking. Yeah. So David's talking again, but he's muted, so I'm going to keep going. Ha ha.
Oh.
So the one of my, in addition to my question about which way the steward's cornucopias face, in the installation ritual which is in the plain text, so it's I'm not giving anything away here. It says, I'll read it off. Brother, whoever, you have been appointed chaplain of this lodge, the Holy Bible or volume of sacred law. And then there's a parenthetical bit that says, which is the chart and textbook of your sacred calling, which, at least around where my lodge is, every single installation officer says that as part of their ritual. My personal opinion, I think that's reserved for people who are like ministers and stuff. That is their calling, is to be the that's their job, right? To be the minister, as opposed to just chaplain of the lodge. But that's just my opinion.
In ours, when we install them, it says it'll be your duty to lead the devotional exercises of the lodge, which should be practiced in the spirit of universal tolerance, which distinguishes our institution. The doctrines of morality and virtue will form the appropriate lessons you're expected to communicate to the brethren of your lodge.
Mm-hmm.
Which, ours. Matt's about to say ours is kind
but
of.
I never see him do anything other than the prayer.
But it's this. I agree. It's this special piece in parentheses that basically says, "Are you accredited?" I mean, I've thought of it that way. That's I appreciate that.
Mm.
Yeah. And ours, like David said, ours is very similar to yours, Stephen. Yeah, it's teach us from its life-giving precepts, and you'll fulfill the duties. I forget the exact text, but yeah.
But other than the prayers and reading the passages as they walk through, or preambulation in the degree, I never see them do anything else. Oh, well, they do grace at the festive board.
There you go.
Right? And that's ours. Ours. Go ahead. Sir.
Oh, I was going to say our chaplain. The circumambulation, we do I think that's a senior deacon part in our ritual, as I recall. And I've seen it done by other brothers in the lodge, but generally it's the senior deacon who does it as he's walking around. But our chaplain, specifically in our lodge at least, frequently is the guy who's keeping track of, for some reason we call it the Sunshine Committee report. It always seems to be more dark than sunshiny to me, but so-and-so is in the hospital, and Bill's wife is ailing, and Tom's, whatever, tripped and broke his ankle or whatever. Somehow a lot of that falls to the chaplain. So I don't know that he's necessarily doing a whole, I mean, he's wired into things. So I guess he knows what he's doing.
Matt, is that particular to your lodge, or is that a general practice in Washington?
I think that's mostly our lodge, but I've seen it in other lodges, but it's certainly not it's not like in the ritual or in the installation or anything that's his job. That's just sort of what he's picked up, because the guy who gets to be permanently the chaplain tends to be that guy.
It's a lot of high-minded language we've attached to the chaplain in both jurisdictions here. Makes me wonder why he's not opening and closing the volume of sacred law, and that falls instead to the senior deacon. Again, I don't want to throw out the potential for a dead horse here, but that maybe once we finally clear up the stewards, the thing about the cornucopias in the direction, we'll introduce that conversation.
Well, actually, in that funny Canadian work, he is the one who opens the volume of sacred law.
Okay.
And in when I go to Penticton,
blasphemy.
They not only open the volume of sacred law, and place a square and compass, but they actually read. They have a particular piece that they read for each different level of degree,
Okay.
right? And so even if they change degrees, every time they change a degree, the chaplain goes up, attends to the volume of sacred law, and has a passage to read. Right? We don't do that in the ancient work, but our senior deacon does that. But
No modernizing of the standard work. That's Matt's hot button.
Right.
This is who wrote the disclaimer. It's the way it's always been, and it's worked. Yeah.
But
Gotcha.
it does lead me to think, well, what are the devotional exercises of the lodge?
Right. I mean, that's what I keep thinking is that should the chaplain, if he were to do what he's maybe supposed to do more, I've even said that to our chaplain. I said, Ron, if you would like to do more, if you want to teach us, if there's something that can connect spirituality and masonry that you want to talk about, man, bring it on. That would be really cool to have a little more spiritual exercise, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be a specific religion. It could be just more holy teachings, if you will. But speaking of revolutions, though, and drawn swords, how'd you like that segue? that was the piece that I underlined as Tyler to kind of wrap up our conversation about officers. I had never even thought about that. I mean, often in our installations, they make a big ceremony of handing the sword or drawing the sword and handing it to the Tyler as part of the installation ceremony. But then he promptly puts it back in the scabbard, and it's a straight sword, of course. I had never thought about it being that it should be the flaming sword and that it should always be drawn in preparation for defense. Makes sense, total sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
also, when both things get big too, that would be heavy to carry around.
It also kind of drives me crazy that it's often thought of as you're kicking the past master out, and a lot of guys kind of joke tongue in cheek that they're get him out of the lodge. You don't want him interrupting. And I think, man, you're expelling years worth of knowledge and opportunity. Why are you kicking this guy out? Now I get the theory. One of the theories is that he has traveled and he's knows the people. So if they come to the door, it's most likely that he will know the visitor and can test them if necessary. Or oh, hey Joe, good to see you. Once they're open, we'll get you in. And he can.
Our Tyler's never been a past master. None of the Tylers ever that I've seen in our lodge have been past masters. Yeah. Yet one of them prevented the Grand Master from entering our lodge because he didn't have his dues card. He refused him entry.
Nice.
He's coming up the stairs with his entourage, right? And he says, "I open the doors. I'm here." And he says, "And who you are? Who?" Right? Because he never read the bulletin from Grand Lodge. He never read, other than our lodge notice. That's the only thing he ever reads, right? So he might know the Grand Master's name by thing, but he says, well, if you're the Grand Master, then you should have a dues card. Give me your dues card and you can go in, right? And it took the commotion for the worshipful master to know that there was a commotion going on outside the doors to send out the master of ceremonies to find out what's going on, right? The director of ceremonies, right? Because he's the only guy who has freedom to run around our lodge, right? So he sends him out, finds out that the Grand Master's sitting out there for a surprise visit.
It's interesting to think if could the Tyler still knock and ask essentially the senior warden or somebody to, hey, can you send somebody out to vouch for this guy? He says he knows people inside, because normally, without divulging too much of the details, the Tyler's supposed to kind of vet the person. And when they answer the door, knock on the door, he tells them, hey, this is a good guy. He's ready to go. But couldn't the Tyler also say, there's somebody out here who claims to be a Mason. I don't know him. Does anybody else know him? I mean, couldn't he do that?
He could. Yeah. He could, by all, I would expect that he would if it got
hope
to
so.
that point. But in this particular instance, it was such a commotion that
Yeah.
that it got the attention of the worshipful master, and he sent somebody out right away. So,
Well, I know we're kind of running on top here, but the last piece is the discussion about the past master and how he advances and stuff. And I really would, if you guys have one, I would really love to see a good YouTube video or something on the Euclid's problem. I like geometry too. I was pretty good at geometry, but the way it's explained, I just don't get it.
Square subtended by the angle opposite the right angle is, or
Yeah,
the side opposite
what
the
he
right angle?
said.
Some of the squares. What's not to understand?
Yeah, if somebody has a good video that can really explain this, because it would be cool. We talk about it, and I know there's guys that can do the tricks on the board. They can show you how it all works too. But wouldn't that be a cool Masonic education piece to really understand what this is and why it's important?
A squared plus B squared, C squared.
Right.
No, and it always works. It always works with a certain ratio, with a certain relationship of numbers, the most basic of which is 3, 4, and 5. So you say 3 3s are 9, 4 4s are 16, and that equals 25. So there's your A squared plus B. So 3, 4, and 5, A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
That's
place to start.
and it's a great place to start. But you know what I hear? Right. So, but now I will go. So we have a guy who's an authority on this, Most Worshipful Brother Bill Ferguson Sr. Okay. He is the one who for many decades installed the immediate past master, gave him his jewel, gave him a little lecture on what that 47th proposition is and how it relates. So I will go to his house and I will interview him and ask him to explain the 47th proposition in layman's terms so that we can get it
and draw it out.
And draw it out, and then I'll share that.
Okay, just keep it to the 47th proposition, because Euclid obviously had 46 more before that.
Yeah.
That one.
And I'll try to keep him on track so he doesn't, go off on a tangent, because he's good at that too. Right?
So are we.
Yeah, so are we. Yeah.
But so in BC, you guys have the immediate past master sit in the east with the master.
Yeah, to his left.
Yeah, that makes much more sense to me than it was our lodge's tradition to boot the past master and make him the Tyler too. And we sort of stopped doing that for exactly that reason. You've got this guy who has all this experience. Why would you throw him out of the room? And actually, although there was another argument you were saying about greeting people, the other argument that I've heard was that essentially it's like harken back to my Navy days, when the new captain relieves the old captain disappears and never comes back again, because you don't want the troops the sailors to go and well, wait a minute, he's the guy no, he's the guy in charge, and you don't want that confusion. You want the master is the master and the old guy's out. But I'd like to think that, well, we're not in the same situations that would require that degree of immediate obedience, but also I'd like to think we're adults that could handle this. But
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Matt, because apparently there is a tradition, I don't know how well it is adhered to in the Anglican Church of Canada, which is of course the Canadian branch of the Church of England, that when your tenure as the vicar of a parish is done, you're supposed to leave and not step foot in that church again for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if other Christian denominations have something similar to that, but that's how they do it there. Yeah, you're done, go away.
I can tell you it's very similar in the Presbyterian Church of the USA, that we have a very similar rule that the old minister goes away and never comes back again. So with that, speaking of throwing ministers out of places, it seems like it is time for us to wrap up this discussion of Freemasons for Dummies. So we encourage you, if you have any questions or thoughts or want to talk to us, send us an email, put up a comment, preferably not a crazy one, on the on YouTube or on the social media, and we'd be happy to talk with you about stuff, about what we've talked about today or other Masonic issues. I do want to say I've been meaning to say for a little while now. So by the time I say this, it'll be and it gets out, it'll be too late. But there is an article in Slate magazine not too long ago about how masonry may be the issue for, or maybe the solution for the issue of loneliness amongst young men in today's society. I thought it was really good when my wife actually found it. I'll give her credit. It came out well, by the time this airs, it came out a few weeks ago, and it was really interesting. I thought I encourage people to go look it up and read it. It has some interesting points about how to communicate with and how what men are looking for these days, in the opinion of that writer. So with that, on behalf of myself and Craig and Stephen and David, I almost said it myself again, but I was first this time. Thank you for listening to the Working Tools podcast, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Goodbye.